is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Joining him is Daniel Sanderson, CEO of Planksip, an international philosophy and cultural media outlet, helping emerging thought leaders with personal branding by co-creating organic content. Tonight's episode, Spirit of 76, with Philip Strouse.
Hey there, Philip.
Hey, good evening, Wade.
Welcome. And to the audience, I'll share with you that normally Dan Sanderson would be taking this opening segment. Dan is unfortunately dealing with a health situation in his family. Somebody near to him is quite ill, and we would welcome your prayers for that situation. But he will not be able to join us tonight. He might be back next week or in a couple of weeks. But our thoughts and prayers are with him as he's spending time with those who are close to him in this time of crisis. So please do remember Dan in your thoughts and prayers. But we've been looking forward to having Philip Strouse on the show tonight. Philip is the author of the title of the show is The Spirit of 76. And now I'm trying to remember the actual title of your book, Philip.
Sure.
I know what it's about, but the title.
Well, the title is Joseph, and then the subtitle is Serve Behind the Set the Stage.
Thank you. We'll be talking a lot about Philip's book here over the show and what it means, what it signifies, and what we can learn from it. And it's a fascinating discussion. But to start with in this opening segment, as we usually do, we're going to talk a little bit about the Genesis story of Philip Strouse. So, Philip, tell us about your origins. Where do you come from, even going back to your parents and heritage, your roots?
Sure. I grew up in western Colorado in Grand Junction. I was born in upper kind of mid-Pennsylvania and moved out there when I was 4 years old. My brother was one, and so I basically been out west. And my parents moved out there. They were English teachers with masters in counseling and then English. And they went out there to help my uncle, who had started in a Christian school in the late 1970s. And so I basically went to a Christian school in 1980 until I graduated in 1982. And during that time, my parents they separated, and so church and that school environment basically became your whole life. And it was a small enough school. You knew everybody from K to 12, K-12 mix, but we were large enough, so you and different sports, and so your whole life revolved around that from Sunday through Saturday, and then you start the week over again. And Chris, we were very close on the football team and so forth. And then upon graduation, I felt, well, the history of some sort. You sometimes people hear the voice of God audibly. That's never happened to me, but you have that still small voice, that impression, that very strong impression that you think, well, maybe, right? That's maybe you thinking that. And so you wait on it, and then but at certain times. So I felt that didn't listen to it. A young man, I got a football scholarship to the local college there, so I did that, and I played 4 games in the first season. I was, as a freshman, on the traveling team, and something was missing. feel like you're in that track that you're supposed to go. So I got out of college and I was looking at Bible school or and then before I know it, I'm appointed to the Air Force Academy. That's not something you fall into. So and I'm doing that. So I went to the Air Force Academy and had the thing where I was recruited to play football. And then I had crazy, not in my I'm going to have my mother never pray for me this way again. She said, feeling as I was going through basic training, she said, Lord, if he's feeling something else, if he's supposed to be in ministry, cause there to be a medical where he is, because I wasn't going to quit, you're not going to, but I had kid doubled me over there on the Strouse Academy in basic training. I moved. And so that ended, the football track. But I will stay at the academy. Again, I don't know if I was hard-headed, but going through things, a lot of life experiences learned there. But in the middle of a hard period of life, because you're looking, of course, with is expanding from this little, Grand Junction and a church, and Christian school to all of a sudden the world's kind of in front of you and around you, and you're learning in the middle of that as life is changing. My parents went from being separated, and you pray to being divorced, and so you really just unplug. You unplug from what you thought, from what you know, and you're like, well, the foundation that I thought was solid is all. It's not concrete; it's gravel. So you stop.
Well, and I'd like to pause there for a moment and take that personal, go a little bit deeper into the personal, but also talk about the universal, right? And those who know me and my trilogy, which is autobiographical, know that my parents' divorce, which was very dramatic in that my father literally kidnapped me and my two sisters when I was 9, just turned 9. She had full custody. The FBI was out. He smuggled us out of the country. We were separated from both parents for 2 years. So my circumstance, it went to the Supreme Court of Sweden before it was settled temporarily in this international court battle for custody. So it's very dramatic, which exacerbated the universal, which is your parents are God. Mm-hmm. They are literally your creators. And as you grow up an infant and you learn about who you are and your place in the world and in the universe, there's something in us, there's a spirit in us, there's a intellect, there's a soul that allows us to navigate through this life experience. And it has a certain orientation to ask that question: who am I? Why am I here? How did I get here? What is my purpose in life? And there's something particularly earth-shattering about a divorce, right? And so in modern society, where anything goes and that nuclear family is viewed as evil and suspect, that somehow we have to come up with any other variation but that. This is having a profound effect on individual children and society as a whole, based on the scale at which this is happening. And the entire foundations of Western civilization are under attack and crumbling on this point. So I want you to go a little deeper now, because you've just said you were already out of college when they divorced. Is that right? Is that what I understood?
I was in my academy, so probably
okay
for graduation, but
okay. But they'd been separated for a while, but you still were praying and hanging on to some kind of hope, and the foundation hadn't completely fallen apart yet for you. That's what I was hearing emotively as you were talking.
Right. So it was interesting, because you go to the academy and you're trying to be polished. They're forming you an Air Force officer and maturing you. And I found kind of contrary to that, because I had grown a regimented, strict, basic training was no problem for me. In fact, I got this award for my squadron as a go through basic, even though I'd been in the hospital and back. So I was used to following very much rules, and I'm very ordered, and they tell me to turn right, I turn right. You don't have to do that, and that was a breeze. But when that falls apart, and all of a sudden, then you're like, well, when order falls apart, trust is so trying to almost go from what you wrong, and then you're getting all the coming in college, and trying to make sense of it and truth. And that's, I think, the good thing is you don't just, well, I just want to stay this way, but it causes you to really dig deeper. Okay, that's not, and it can take you one or two ways. You can say, well, then everything I know about God or about the Bible is false. It was given to me by people that betrayed that trust. Or you can dig past that foundation you thought that turned, and you can see, well, maybe it was still built on that chief cornerstone that's back there. You have to the dross, move that away, because maybe that's what you really need to dig down to begin with. So I started doing that, and it was good. That's the silver lining of the blessing within the hurt. I have to figure this out for myself, not because mom or dad, but take what they gave me, and then piece. Where do I put that piece of the puzzle? Is that part of this puzzle I should be using? And of course it is. They're your gods, they're your creators, and so it's hard when you hear everlasting Father. Well, my father left, so a trust aspect there. And subconsciously you deal with that, even though you know better as far as being perfect, but you see things going on in the world, and you see other things, and you're like, everlasting Father. Anyway, so that's kind of my background going through. So, as an officer, but you still have that call that didn't come from your parents, didn't come from you, and so you're dealing with that. And so, as a Air Force officer, the main track, if you're an academy grad, you're going to be a career officer. But I again go right out of high school. I felt that that's not what I'm missing. I'd be missing life if I do. And then it's a great life. It's a lot of service, and I've been able to serve in that active duty 6 years, and then going on to other. I'm doing that now for the federal government to help officials. So I feel fulfilled that way. But that's not the aim. Is to be a high-ranking Air Force officer. So I got out of 6 years. I went back to Colorado, back to Grand Junction, helped my in the church and school, and I felt fulfilled and doing different things. And then I got into FEMA, Emergency Management Agency, because when Katrina hit, the Gulf Coast, stationed down there at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, and Biloxi got hit, Waveland, and of course to New Orleans. My wife's from Pensacola, so we were, how can we help? And FEMA was hiring because it was such a massive. I've been doing things in FEMA now 15, 20 years. And the respect is still there. And I think that's what leads me up to whenever how this book came about is I wasn't preaching or teaching. I wasn't behind a microphone, but things came to me that this is I'm dealing with. And then as I started, we get into the research and how the book comes. That's what was kind of that's kind of the is that calling that even if you go with the Lord, he lets ever, and that's a beautiful thing about it. We have this mind where we can rationalize, or we can, what to show us. And I think that's what this journey is. It's going to the whole thing about the subtitle with you behind the scenes for each other to set the stage. Are you posturing yourself? Too many people try to do that, and we see that doesn't get anywhere. If anything, that leads to greater conflict, micro and macro levels. But if you're working together, I think that's been the beauty of emergency management. I can go into further detail of that and some various scenarios after that as well.
Yeah, well, this has been very, very helpful for me as a host. Normally, Dan does this on the show. And we're going to now go to our first commercial break, which is a commercial break for your book. And we like to remind the audience that participating in the chat is your ticket to a free copy of Philip's book. So at the end of the show, Philip will choose the comment that he feels good about, that he likes, that he'd like to highlight for whatever reason. And our sponsor will then provide a copy of that book to that person who provided that comment. So do engage with the chat. Also, like, subscribe, share, all that, so that we can build the audience to the show. When we come back from this very short commercial break, we're going to talk about Philip's book and a little bit about how that book has further shaped and changed his worldview and what we can learn from it. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
In the tapestry of time, where the footprints of history are etched by almost invisible figures, one name echoes through the ages. Dr. Joseph Warren. Philip Strouse invites you on a journey through the trails of time, exploring the critical role this physician played in Boston and beyond. From antiquity to the birth of the United States, these often overlooked agents propelled generations into unimaginable realms. This biography not only highlights several Josephs but focuses on Warren, perhaps the most enigmatic of them all. What he did, and what he didn't do, continues to resonate globally. Join the author as he reveals how Warren chose to serve others, creating a legacy that transcends time. Discover the enigma, explore the past. Joseph, Serve Behind the Scenes to Set the Stage, by Philip Strouse. Available at Amazon.
Wonderful. There is a QR code there. If anyone wants to point their phone at it, you don't have to wait. You can go order that book right now off of Amazon. It'll take you there. You can support Philip and the show by getting a copy of his book, or you can engage in the chat and perhaps be the proud winner of a copy of that book. So let's start by having you briefly tell us, who was Joseph Warren?
Well, that's I think that's the big book way it is. He should be known like George Washington, every American, and he's not. And that's what piqued my. I was not seeking this out. I'll kind of walk backwards if I could, and then Joseph Warren piece of that. But there's an epilogue. There's a prologue, epilogue, and the thing is an epilogue for Warren, why we don't know about him as we should. But chapter 8 is really the culmination, and it's focused on this Joseph. And there, of course, there's several Joseph in the Bible, and I take those various time and epochs and various individuals out, and I kind of run through the book with Joseph Warren and that with that Old Testament replica or shadow or similarity between the two and their times of life. But the Joseph Barsabbas that I was really starting to research, and he's the one that was overlooked. His name, he's not a no name in the Bible. And that's very interesting why the Bible would do that, to say, well, there's Matthias and Joseph, and sorry, Joseph, sit down. We're not picking you. Matthias is people think, well, Matthias must have been the one that was God, was the one that should be the next apostle who replaced Judas. So they would have 12 apostles again. So this Joseph, why does the Bible mention him? And so delving into that, and as I was doing that, my two sons were very at the time, and this was years ago, because it took me about 7 years to do all the research and complete the book. So all of a sudden, I have this Joseph Warren, and I'm reading this children's book, and it's talking about Revolutionary War, Boston, and Joseph Warren pops up. And then as I start reading, he's behind the scenes, and you know Paul Revere, and you know Samuel Adams, and you know John Hancock. Well, he's right there with them. The one that sounded really had the alarm system, and it was the one that had Paul Revere come to his house that night to say it's time. And we don't, and there are reasons for that in the book that I explain. But was a doctor in coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, we can appreciate how really ravaged a society smallpox was. COVID-19 times inoculating people and helping them, and so he was doing this for of as a colony to the very lowliest lows of the, and he was right in the middle of that, doing all of that in the years of Revolutionary War. That's how we got to meet and become great friends. Samuel Adams and John Adams, because he was there. And then he was in all these committees, of course, the Long Room Club and the Sons of Liberty, and of course Paul Revere and Joseph Warren with Samuel Adams is right along that. Our discussion tonight is very key, because in a couple of weeks of 2023 is going to be the 200th of the Boston Tea Party, and he did all the research. He was the instigator. He was not there at the South meeting. The large, we had the Old North Church we know about with Paul Revere in Boston, across the water from Charleston. It had the two lights in it. But the South meeting house was the big church on the south side then of Boston, and that was big enough to hold the populace when they came together to meet. Well, that's what started the Boston Tea Party. They went, Sam Adams and others gave the cue that the governor's not going, the boats to go back, we're going to have to deal with the tea. We're not going to be taxed. We're going to tea. And so that 250th anniversary is coming weeks on December 16th. And so Joseph was then became the governor pro tem, let's say president of the Massachusetts colony, because John and Sam Adams and John Adams, they would always go to Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. But Joseph Warren was staying behind because he was a doctor, trying to keep all the committees of correspondence, the committee of safety, and very doing with munitions and the pre-positioning of things. He was taking care of all that while they were in Philadelphia, and he set everything up. And so that's where the alarm system and Paul Revere, the Midnight Ride, comes from. Was the one doing all that. He was the one going again, because he was 40s were the ones that were the loyalists. They were, and of course the Sons of Liberty, ones that were saying they weren't against the king, they were against the Parliament. That, hey, we're over here things we're not, we're being overburdened.
No taxation without representation.
Exactly. So he was the one, he was the mediator and trying to keep it. And so as I researched, and I did different biographies that were done, because I didn't know how am I going to write and do it factually. So I had to really use those books and do a lot of connecting the dots. So he was the one that really, and I say this right at the beginning of the book. It's not a mystery, I cover and the back cover kind of, who is this guy? But and I start out with Paul Revere, and then after I talk about, well, it's Joseph Warren behind the scenes, and then we go into each chapter. There's the Joseph of Genesis, the Joseph of who is to Jesus and when he's a baby. And then there's so it's not Joseph who was there at his birth, and you had all these Josephs lined up, and we have these Josephs in early that we talk about, Joseph Warren being the primary, but this other historian that was writing just like or Joseph of the first century, you have this Joseph Plum Martin, the ordinary foot soldier that was the one writing the history for Washington and the others in those trenches. And so looking at those really, everything circles around Joseph Warren. And I think the big thing is where he served behind in the clip, the advertisement where it said he did things, or he did not do things that caused things to become as they were. He did not step out, very much so, first president of the United States. Where he was thinking of things that should be done, the Suffolk resolves and other things before Patrick Henry and George Washington were doing them. And if he was going to be he was commissioned a brigadier general, but he went to Bunker Hill and he wanted to be in the front lines. And he was not about position. He was not about looking at, well, he's going to direct troops. He's going to go troops under the most fire as a doctor and say, I'm going to serve right along with them. And then that was part of his demise, is because he was there and he let everybody else retreat from Bunker Hill, which is really on Breed's Hill. And I talk about that in the book. And so he was the last one to retreat, and that's where he lost his life. He basically gave it up. And we see throughout that things that he resembles what Jesus Christ was and is, as far as that servant and coming and really standing in the gap, not seeing but doing it for the benefit of others. And it's really inspirational when I was researching this comes to life. And when I got to go to Boston, saw where all of that happened, it's just amazing. And people know who he is, and they should. He's larger than life.
Well, I'm fascinated by history, and I love learning about history. I want to make it a little bit more personal as well, not just to you, but again, the audience. So Joseph in the Bible, that first Joseph, I don't know if there was a Joseph prior to Jacob's son Joseph. I don't think so. I think he was the first Joseph in the Bible. But he was the one who was thrown in a pit by his brothers, sold into captivity, and then rose to be second in command under Pharaoh, and played this incredibly important role in guiding the nation with prophetic help through a period of great famine, right? He was the one who commissioned the building of storehouses to store up food. Those students of the Bible might remember the dreams about the 7 fat years and the 7 lean years, the 7 snakes, I think, that ate other snakes, the 7 grains that ate other. Anyway, God showed him through this series of dreams that there would be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. And so he initiated this program to store up, food. And Egypt was in the breadbasket of the world. And this leads to the story of his brothers then coming to Egypt because there was famine in the land of Canaan. So my point in bringing up that story is you won't find archaeological or historical evidence for Joseph outside the Bible. If it weren't for the Bible, nobody would know about that Joseph. And so there are many who deny that he existed because the Egyptians didn't record anything about that Joseph, right? And later you have the story of his descendants. He was honored for Pharaoh, but then his descendants became slaves for the Egyptians, and naturally who would, any antecedent of a slave people would be erased from history. It's quite natural to understand why the Egyptians would have erased Joseph from history. But my point in bringing up that story is your point about Joseph Warren being unknown, right? And yet here he was doing all these incredibly important things behind the scene. Each of us can relate to that in our own lives. And times and places where we have hopefully been serving behind the scenes, even though many of us might have wanted to be in the limelight or receiving the glory. I have a 12-year-old son who's playing basketball, and he's very concerned about how much time he gets on the court and whether or not he's able to get the ball and whether he's able to make a basket. We all go through these experiences that help us get a handle on what Jesus said. You alluded to it, or what was said about Jesus. I think it was in Peter, let this mind be in you, which was in Christ Jesus, who humbled himself and came to this earth in the flesh to become a servant to all. And he bent down and he washed the feet of his disciples. And he warned Peter, against his attitude when Peter said, you shouldn't be washing our feet. And Peter then immediately said, well, then if that's the case, then wash all of me. I just want to be whatever you want me to be. But I'm off on a tangent now, but what I wanted to get to here is, Philip, when I was listening to that opening segment about who you are, where you come from, and how you ended up where you're at in probably a very important role in FEMA, taking responsibility in a variety of ways during natural disasters to save the lives and remediate the suffering of so many. But it's behind the scenes. Nobody knows who Philip Strouse is, and all we hear is the complaints of when things don't go well and when things aren't perfect. Is there a personal element that drove you to study into Joseph Warren? Does all of that somehow play into your interest in writing this book about Joseph Warren?
As far as the FEMA experience,
well, yeah, your own experience of ending up maybe not being in the ministry, not publicly preaching the word, but doing physical things behind the scenes that really have nothing to do with per se teaching about God and Jesus, but to spoil the punchline, the best sermon is a sterling example, right? And Jesus told us if we claim to love God, but we don't love our brother, we claim to love God whom we have not seen, but we don't love our brother whom we have seen, then we don't love God.
Right. Yeah. And even further, it says, invite those over to your house, like, let's say your brother or those that your friend, because you expect payment. Invite those over that are without, and take that love to the next level. As you were saying that, the one thing that has out to me in my FEMA career is we were saying goodbye to somebody who had been up in Washington, D.C. and external throughout Katrina and the things after, right, when everybody's blaming FEMA, and FEMA just takes it because you're not saying, well, it was the governor's fault or mayor's fault. You just take it, right? But this other official, who I look up to, said to this person who was departing, that you and everything you did, and went through all these examples, said, And that stuck with me, the way he said it. And one of the most encouraging things, as I read the chat, I can say this, that the most inspiring thing about FEMA, especially a very fractured world, dysfunctional world within, let's say within, again, it's easy to complain. It's easy to fault. I mean, children do that. We learn at a very early age. I think the maturity aspect is, what's the solution, or how do you work together despite the conflict? You have people of all races. You have people of all backgrounds. You have people of all political, religious persuasions. And when a hurricane is threatening, and we're all in that emergency operations center, see any differences. You see people coming in 50 room, 250 seats in the room. You have this operations section chief here, logistics section chief. You have your situation unit lead. You have your specialist. And they all have certain tasks. And the only way they're going to get that done is if they all work together. They don't have to brainstorm. It just becomes natural, and they're not doing it for each other. There's somebody down in Punta Gorda, Florida, that's going to be not a victim, a survivor. And you're going to do it for a survivor, and that survivor is never going to know, but you do it anyway because it's the right, because that's and doing it, we're working together. And I think that's the most inspiring thing of FEMA. Is FEMA perfect? No. I think too is you come together knowing you're not perfect, but you're going to do your dead level best to do the right thing, and doing it together. So part of that is, behind the, that kind of works itself into the book. But the biggest thing is, with these, we call them the founding fathers, and there were founding mothers that didn't get this as well, but we're certainly working that. And it's America, but people are sure trying to get in here. I don't see people trying to immigrate to another place as much as
I might have shared this on the show before, but I have a cousin in Sweden, and you've got the Baltic Sea there between Scandinavia and formerly the Soviet Union, and he used to joke about the submarines that patrolled there, that they were protecting the workers' paradise to make sure that people didn't get in.
Yeah. And hey, I think also, Wade, I mean, there are good nations around. As Americans, we say, well, we're exceptional, and I think in some ways we are.
Well, I would hope that every nation thinks they're exceptional in some way.
Exactly. Right, because they all have, a lot of nations have very good attributes. But
I went to a church university that had 3 campuses, and we were literally trained to say in rivalry between the 3 campuses, that because there was rivalry, right? And good rivalry, but we were trained to say that the 3 campuses mutually excelled each other.
Right. Yeah. And even being overseas, spending time in the Middle East, you can appreciate where the perspective is that it's a very hedonistic society. It's very, and so
materialistic, hedonistic. Yep.
And you can appreciate that, and so it goes back to not red, white. With this book, it goes back to humanity, and Warren's not doing. They didn't have a Stars and Stripes back then. They're trying to say, how do we work together? And I'll even to the next level, talking about the Boston Tea Party. So people will quickly read through it, and they assume they donned camouflage, as Native Americans. And people would think, if they don't thinking, they were flippant, they were gonna and that's not the case at all. Search it. They wore Mohawk outfits. The Mohawks weren't anywhere around there. Wampanoag, the Massachusetts, and the Nauset peoples around Boston. We're up in the New York, Vermont area, Albany area. And I go into why they not, so that they would get blamed. It's more of a respect. And it had a lot of symbolism of why they, and that's where people, if they don't do diligent in research, that's where they get off to think, well, this person, they were racist in this. Well, no, it was totally opposite. And I think that's where more care and looking at perspective is key.
Yeah, well, don't let facts get in the way of your bias and your ideology.
No, of course. It's right. It takes too much work to really get to the
so. Yeah. Well, we're gonna take a quick commercial break to share a word from our sponsor, Something or Other Publishing. And when we come back, we're going to dive into a little bit more, I think, the spiritual nature of what you're talking about, and maybe talk about what kind of implications it has for the kind of people that we should be. So for those of you who are joining late, this is Philip Strouse, a celebrated author. Are you a director, policy, emergency analyst and policy advisor, right, for the Department of Homeland Security's Federal Emergency Management Agency? Is that right?
That's. I'm just behind the curtain.
So we'll be back with more of author and FEMA policy advisor Philip Strouse right after this word from our sponsors. Stay tuned.
And welcome to Something or Other Publishing, or as our friends like to call us, SOUP. SOUP is a platform that connects authors, readers, and service providers in one convenient place. Choose SOUP if you're an author with a great book idea and you're looking for a publisher offering hands-on coaching in some of the best royalties in the business. Or if you're a reader who enjoys engaging with celebrated and emerging authors. We already have over 3,000 of them, and more are joining every day. You can even win free books by voting on their book ideas. Or maybe you're a service provider and you're looking to engage with over 3,000 authors. We're here to help. So whether you're an author, a reader, or a service provider, you're in the right place at SOUP. Contact us at help@soupllc.com to learn more.
Welcome back. I'm here with author Philip Strouse. For those of you who don't know about Something or Other Publishing, there is also an annual short story contest. This is the QR code. Recently, they've been awarding a lot of cash prizes to those who qualified and won awards in last year's contest. But there's a new one that's going on right now, and now's the time to get those submissions in. So just point your phone at that QR code and learn more about that. Not to take you away from the show, but bookmark it for later. So we're here with Philip Strouse, and right before this, we were diving deep into who Joseph Warren was, the focus of your book, how he was behind the scenes, but incredibly important in a number of those key critical moments and events that were critical to the founding of our nation. And yet nobody's heard of him. And we were talking a little bit about others who do that, who serve behind the scenes. So you spent a lot of your life in the world of religion, Christianity, service to God, emulating Jesus. Tell us a little bit more about that, how you incorporate that into your daily life, what it means to you, and how others in the audience can emulate that as well.
Sure. Well, going back to your upbringing, I think and everybody, not to make too broad of a statement, but things, and if people try to fill that with philosophy or religion or reform, that is. But again, I'm a person that likes facts. I like to, if there are 100 different facts, I'm not good with facts. I want it all 100 facts of something before I'll execute something. So I'm always studying, and I think the big thing is it goes rationale. Human rationale can be very limited. Also, it can be very deceiving. So people meditate. They find it they're away from the noise of modern life. But when you get down to it, as far as what I see and experience as I read, and then you look at current events and you look how people function or how they live and what drives them, and you look at kind of the source behind that in their culture and in their religion. But my thing, Wade, is you look at Christianity. Christianity is a very broad term, because within Christianity or major religions, you have different sects or different dogmas or doctrines, and by the splintering and well, where's the nugget of belief system, and that's where you get pieces together to say, well, this holds up to test of time, or this resonates because if you look at this Jesus Christ who lived and what he did, and it's not a farce. Of all time changed, for the common area, and so he did something, or he resonated. It upended time and space. And you look at the different accounts of going right outside the Bible, and Flavius Josephus and extra biblical take on it, and these people that Jesus affected, and they stayed true to the death. Why? What did they see? And in my book, I talk about this Joseph and why he's so important, because Jesus was not taken off the cross when he was comatose. The Romans were very much adept at killing people, and they wouldn't go until they had confirmation of that. And this Joseph from Arimathea is crucial. I went in the book looking at all of that and saying, again, people say, well, Jesus was this or Jesus was that. I don't own Jesus. I don't sell Jesus. I have a take where I'm dogmatically saying it's Jesus this, Jesus that. I'm just saying what I've seen in my study and rigorous pursuit of what is truth keeps coming back to these things in the Middle East 2,000 years ago, even previous, and you see how Scripture comes together to what we can. And belief and science are not. It's all a matter of how you look at it, and you can see things in theology and geology, and the stars. You can see things make sense unless there's a creator. And then if there's a creator, wait, it takes more faith to be an atheist.
Right.
It takes, I don't know how you do it. I really, to say things, all this matter king, that's extreme faith. How does that happen? So something at the beginning that emanates, and of course you get all these theories, but you go left of point A, and they're like, well, something had to go. Well, of course. And so you look at, it says the heavens display the glory of God. It's too intricate, too mathematical. It's too detailed. And the smarter we get in technology, the smarter we get at saying it's not a cosmic blob. There's more to it. So I do know the case for creator, is very much against God and wanted to prove that God didn't. In the case for creator, that was the book, the least Strobel, the author, because he kept running into evidence pointed to something. And I think that's what I do is that's talking about FEMA. I look at quantitative facts and I come up with them. Just don't throw things out there. So that's kind of what drove the book. Going back to, it doesn't matter if people believe. Again, that's counter, because there are things I know that another worldview helps me to understand, and then that's my faith, and it builds and reconstructs and helps polish. There might be a beam in my own eye, right? And so that helps. That other certainly helps. Other worldviews help. You didn't see Jesus shutting people down. You didn't see, that, but Jesus didn't do that.
Yeah. So you mentioned facts, science, religion. You mentioned scripture. You've also mentioned other worldviews and other religions. So how do you? This show it's not a Christian show at all, in that sense, that we're not here to advocate for Christianity.
Right.
But we also have had Muslims on the show. We've had Baha'is on the show. We're open to other religious perspectives, and a lot of our audience is very interested in that intersection of these different faiths. You talked about Jesus, evidence that Jesus was who he claimed to be, in that the whole world was reshaped in his image in a variety of ways. We have, the Jews of his day were expecting a conquering king. They didn't get that. They got somebody who was led like a lamb to the slaughter. But kings were coronated in his name. Every knee bowed to Jesus, even the knees of sovereigns, the knees of kings bowed to Jesus as they were crowned in his name. And they claimed to derive their authority from that source that he revealed. So, but this is also true of other civilizations and other religions. What's your personal take on that? Or do you have one? Have you thought much about that?
Well, I think, let me say it this way. I can see it almost from, as an outsider, because if you really look at it, let's just use the holiday season. So you hear a war on Christianity. Well, when you really stat, and not, I don't say this for disparage any part of Christian, but Christmas is not a Christian religion. People think it is.
Yeah, Jesus wasn't actually even born anywhere near that time, and he never asked people to celebrate his birth, and we could go on and on from there, right?
Yeah, right. Christmas trees are not Christian. This goes back to why Halloween is Halloween and why Easter, but they're not Christian holidays. But that's what Christians get.
Yeah, Easter is a derivative of the Passover and the goddess Ishtar. right
Right.
down to the Easter eggs and the bunny rabbits.
It's fertility, and so in the
Right.
spring, right? But and that's
Yep.
where, so you look at people saying, the Christian aspect of it, you're defensive about Christmas, and you're like, if you understand what it's about, you're defending some pagan, celebration, but it has a
Right.
Christmas label to it. And
Not that there's
I look
anything
at
wrong with that, right? No, I say that jokingly because it's the ones who would most decry pagan influence that are unaware of the pagan influence.
right. So I look at it and I have not world as far as to understand, and nor would I do any even traveling the world to understand Hinduism and Baha'ism in great detail unless you're immersed in it for more than just vacation, right?
Right.
And so to look at all that and I see how I listen to faiths, and I try to glean what is good, and if they thing I could look at people of the Christian faith and I'm like, well, they're acting, or I don't want part of that because that doesn't seem like a righteous, God source love or feeling for another person. Knowing,
Well,
yeah.
let me just interject here and then let you continue, so don't lose your thought. My own journey included what I call a 10-year spiritual dead end, where I was looking to figure out what on earth is God doing? Where is God working? Where is God active? Because of the kinds of disillusionment that you spoke about earlier, where certain things you believed to be true turned out not to be true, certain things in which you had placed your trust, your faith, your confidence fell apart. But I didn't give up hope in who God was. But I just recognized that, and you've mentioned a couple of times the still small voice, so I'll unpack that for our audience a little bit. The still small voice is a reference to Elijah in the cave on Mount Carmel, where there was an earthquake, there was a great fire, there was a whirlwind. I believe it was a fire. There were three things: earthquake, wind, and I think fire. And God was in none of those things. And then, and only after those great displays of power and things that would strike fear, right, that traditionally people had associated with God. And God wasn't in any of those things. And then God spoke to Elijah in that still small voice. So I'm out looking for this, and I ended up in India. It's a long story. I ended up making multiple trips there, and I ended up with a broken down car and sick and sleeping outside on cement at a car park in this little village called Tiruvannamalai, which is known as being a spiritual center, the Red Mountains. And in the middle of the night, the whole city of Tiruvannamalai was up circumambulating this mountain. And I was caught in like the meteor belt of these people on their three-wheeled taxis, and the kids and the lights and the parents and the motorcycles, and everyone up chanting and singing while I'm trying to get some sleep because I'm sick and the car's broken down. I'm like, why have you brought me out here to die? And that there was something about that moment. There was something about the religious devotion of these people worshiping God that began an opening and a transformation. And of course, it was me literally searching, where is God working? And there's nowhere that he's not working. There's no, open your eyes. You want to see where God is working? Nothing. The universe is constantly being sustained. The Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures talk about every atom, every bird, every hair on your head, right? God is everywhere and in everything. And even though, okay, so he wasn't in the earthquake. It's funny though that you talk about this. Now I'm off on a tangent. It's funny that you talk about the still small voice and you work for FEMA, right? I told you not to lose your train of thought, and here I'm going in every other direction. But the point being that we do want on this show for people to awaken in new and different ways and to connect directly with God. And it's not up to me or you or any guest on the show to tell them where to find God.
Right.
But they need to find God in their own way and on their own terms and get guidance from that still small voice.
The 2 points. So I was trying to remember, make sure I did what I was going to say, and then it ties in perfectly with what way you set it up. Going back, I was thinking, talking about Christianity and some other, other religions. You will not find a perfect church, or it's comprised of imperfect people. And it goes fault in each other or in cultures. And then it goes to the second part. You're talking about where that piece where we're going to go into this nation and they need to know this stuff. And right, because we put it upon ourselves to say, I'm here to save you. Well, God's already there, right? God's bigger. God's omnipresent. And this, say he, but being this divine, the God of the universe is his footstool. And, he owns it all. He's already there. Us showing up in a red cape, that's not the thing to be concerned about. God wants relationship with more than even we think he does. And for us to have mindset, John the Baptist said, he must increase and I must. And I think that's the driving aim in me.
Mm-hmm.
How do I get behind the scenes? How to become more like Christ? How does he become me, where I'm ready to sit under the table and wash people's feet? How do I make sure that's my nature? I have to constantly think about, but how does that become second nature because I have that in Christ? How do I become that servant to others? And so that's, I think that's where people in Phoenix, I can't speak for everybody, of course, but that's what drives me. Is doesn't matter who knows my name or doesn't know my name. That's immaterial. Am I doing something today that would please the thing that, what would he's here in human form? What would he do if he was wearing my shirt and my shoes? How would he operate? And how then should I operate in his footsteps?
Amen. So we're at that point in the show where we want to look at the chat. And I saw from some of the chat earlier that there have been, I guess, a little bit of technical difficulties. I've actually had my connection go in and out a couple of times. Somebody was commenting that they were having a hard time hearing you early on. So we haven't had a lot of audience interaction tonight, perhaps because of that, but there have been a few. So I don't know if you can see the chat, Philip, and if there's anybody that you want to call out to talk about or discuss or highlight here.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce the name right, but Rahim had several chats, mentioned atheists in public and some other things and different beliefs. So I'm interested.
Yeah, so
comments.
He's talking specifically about atheist republic. I believe from some subsequent comments he may be talking about Iran. Mm-hmm. And it mentions it here too, Iranian victim of. So religious freedom, religious beliefs around the world, have always been, it seems, and continue to be under attack in a variety of ways. Again, different from what we were highlighting here, in that people are insisting that one must believe a certain way.
Right.
And applying.
Well,
just applying force to that idea.
Yeah. Well, I think even America, and you talk about too much stereotype, or we overseas because you say, well, Iran is a state sponsor and is the enemy. Iran is a country referring to probably Saud's leadership, but Iranian, we lump some things haphazardly with all of the people in Iran and even the people in Iran and for freedom, what they want for their children is often overlooked in the media or in DC and I think also he mentioned about a lot of those faiths emanating, of course, Father Abraham, and how I understand it, Abraham was not driven west, driven out of an area, but he was called and he was right and faithful because he place where the Lord was drawing him. He was not forced, propelled physically. He was drawn and he obeyed.
Well, I think there's some extra biblical history there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, where and because the Quran also talks extensively about Abraham and some other writings as well, where he was the proponent of there being one God, and that I'm trying to remember which city he was in, where idolatry was incredibly common, and it was a big industry too. And I may not get the story right, but he went into like a warehouse and he smashed all the idols. And there was one idol left standing, and he said, this one idol, this one God must have smashed all the other ones, or something like that. And this led to conflict. And so I think that may be what is being referred to here, of him being driven out. But that doesn't mean it wasn't also true that God told him to get out and go to leave your father and mother and go. I mean, he could be that Abraham would have stayed and fought this battle. You follow me?
Right.
So these two stories don't have to be in conflict.
Right. Very well said. Very well said. With that in mind, I think of Gideon. Not Moses, Gideon. They were not looking for position. They were minding their own business. And this still small voice, or this calling. But one of the first things he does is
was certainly not looking to have his army reduced down to 300 men.
Right. No. Right. But that goes in with what Gideon did to the idols and tore down the grove. His father said, well, wait a second. Now, this is a God. Plead his own case. He'll take care of my son. To the part of Gideon and going from 20,000 to 10,000 to 300, it goes back to, it's not about us. It's not our strength. It's what are we supposed to do in obedience, and the Lord takes care of what they, and not because of our strength, but So that's a good point. I'm glad you said.
Well, and I think too, I have a friend who's given me advice on a number of occasions. He's very well trained in law, and he talks about the clean hands doctrine, which is no matter how you've been wronged, you must then be careful how you react, because how you react, even if you're the victim, you can and often do things that then will be called up in a court of law, and it will be flipped, and you will be the one who will end up being actually charged guilty of a crime because of what you did after you were attacked, and because your hands aren't clean. And so, so it is with, there was a time in my life when I thought I was doing the work of God. And there was a phraseology in the religious group and organization that I was in, is, we were doing God's work. And then I began to get my head around that in a different way. And I'm like, so God is unemployed? Is that, what, if what's he doing, right? What's he doing? And it wasn't my original idea. Somebody else made a joke about this in terms of the hierarchy. It's like, well, this person's doing this person's work, and this person's doing, and then this person's doing, what's he doing? Well, he's doing God's work. Well, then what's God doing, right? And but usually what we're doing is getting in the way. We're getting in the way of God, as we think we're doing something in his name, or we're name dropping God's name. And isn't that the first commandment? Do not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Right. So when we start claiming things in his name, there's a phrase called making partners with God, which is the last thing on earth you want to do, because God is not your partner in that sense. But it leads to this other idea, which is a reflection on something you said earlier about standing outside and trying to be objective. Jesus gave the sign. In my opinion, it's the sign of the Christian covenant. You want to know what the sign of the covenant is? With Abraham, it's circumcision. The sign of the covenant of Noah is the rainbow. The sign of the covenant with Moses is the seventh-day Sabbath, as explained in Exodus chapter 16 and elsewhere. So what's the sign of the Christian covenant? Well, I believe Jesus gave it very clearly in John 13:35. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples. But that phraseology gets at that objective outside third-party observer status. You don't get to claim to have that sign. Your little group, whoever you are, or your big group, doesn't get to claim to have that sign. No, by this shall all men know. The outside independent third-party observer, who is not part of your group, gets to look at you and the horse you rode in on and all your girlfriends at the behavior of this group and make that decision. By this shall all men know that you're my disciples, that you have love one for another. And it doesn't mean just love your own group. It means love all mankind, all of God's creation. It even means, fulfilling that very first commandment in the Bible, dress and keep the garden, right? The second commandment being, be fruitful and multiply. And we've done that very well. We've become the most invasive species the world has ever seen. But are we dressing and keeping the garden, right? So are we loving our fellow man? And can an outside, independent, objective, third-party observer look at us and say that we are? And you can't fake that. To right. Another point that you made earlier.
Well, right, because human intuition, they can tell when something is, when it's love faked, But that's a great point, because programs, it's not building. It's right. What's that? Paul said, "Boy, I could my life to the stake, to be burned. I could write these epistles. I could do that, but if I don't have love, I'm just a tinkling cymbal."
Yep.
And
making a big loud noise, a big loud splash, or you might say just massive virtue signaling, right? Massive virtue signaling.
Right.
Well, so we've just got one more task. It sounds like, from what you were saying earlier, that you'd like NSAN to be the recipient of that book.
Yeah, very active in the comments, and I think lended itself to the conversation.
I'm just putting in the chat right now. So that if he's not here, he'll see it. With that, the only thing I have, we're going to forego the last commercial break today. I'm just going to mention next week's guests. J. Aaron Simmons, author of Camping with Kierkegaard. Faithfulness is a way of life. Existential philosophy is used by, for Aaron Simmons, faithfulness is a way of life, and existential philosophy is a means of finding meaning. Join us as we learn how Pentecostal philosopher J. Aaron Simmons uses outdoor experiential activity as a resource for rethinking a culture that idolizes achievement and success as a determinant of one's personal value. In contrast to this success orientation, Simmons draws on existential philosophy, pop culture, and outdoor experience in order to argue that faithfulness is a better way forward. So we'll have author Aaron Simmons, who is a philosophy professor who incorporates his religion into his teachings, as well as outdoor experiential learning. Next week, same time, same place. In the meantime, Philip, thank you so much for being with us. I hope you've enjoyed it. Is there anything that you didn't get to say or share during your time here today? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot, but anything in particular?
Enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate you having me on this. And hey, every conversation, every interaction, I learn something. So that's what it's all about. And I appreciate this time.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you'll consider coming back and joining us again sometime in the future. It's been just it's been an honor, frankly, to meet somebody who behind the scenes is working to serve those in this country who are caught in unfortunate circumstances, and to know that there's a heart and a spirit behind that. I've never been in a situation where I've had any reason to criticize FEMA, but I've certainly heard a lot about it in the news, and it's a political football that gets thrown around. I appreciate you taking the time to come join us and show that there's so much more behind it, as well as the book that you've written. I do hope that many of our listeners will check out your book, Joseph. I would like to also dig in a little bit deeper. There's another whole aspect of Joseph that we didn't even get into. Even the meaning of the name, he will add. What does that mean? But I'm not going to invite you to comment. I'm just going to say, I think there's a sequel. I think there's another appearance for you in the future here on the show, if you're willing.
Very well. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Philip. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Until then, take care, and may God be with you. Bye now.